Naomi Wren stepped down from the stagecoach at Cedar Bluff, with Montana dust on the hem of her traveling skirt, and one hand pressed against the brass latch of her smallest trunk. The trunk was not the heaviest one. It was not the grandest. But it was the only one she watched when the driver unloaded the baggage. A cold April wind moved through the little station yard, carrying the smell of horse sweat, stove smoke, and thawing earth. Cedar Bluff was smaller than she had imagined from the letters. One street, a livery, a mercantile with faded blue shutters, a freight office, a boarding house, and beyond all of it the long brown sweep of open country rising toward distant ridges. For a moment, Naomi stood still and let the size of the place meet her. Then she saw Gideon Hale. He stood beside a plain wagon near the hitching rail, hat in hand, dark coat dusted at the shoulders. He was taller than she had expected, lean from work rather than hunger, with a face weather had not softened. His beard was trimmed short. His eyes were gray, steady, and tired in a way she had noticed in men who had buried someone they loved and kept living because animals still needed feed. He knew her before she said a word. Of course he did. There were only two women stepping from the stage, and the other one was elderly, small, and being collected by 3 grandchildren. Gideon looked at Naomi. For one breath, his expression changed. It was not disgust. It was not contempt. It was that quick, helpless adjustment people made when the person before them did not match the picture in their head. His eyes moved once over her broad figure, her strong shoulders, the heavy fall of her dark traveling dress, then came back to her face too quickly. Naomi had spent too many years reading such moments to miss it. And worse, he knew she had seen it. That was the first honest thing between them in Montana territory. He crossed the yard toward her without delay. "Mrs. Hale," he said. The name struck her strangely. She had signed it once already in a courthouse 2 towns east that morning, with a tired clerk, 2 witnesses, and Gideon standing beside her as formal as a man signing a contract for winter hay. But hearing it in his voice made it more real than ink. "Mr. Hale," she replied. "Gideon, if you can manage it." "Naomi, then." He gave a small nod, as if they had settled a piece of business properly. Then he looked past her toward the baggage. "Which trunks are yours?" "The brown one, the green one, the carpet bag, and that smaller walnut trunk near the wheel." His eyes moved to it. The walnut trunk had leather straps darkened by travel, and a new lock she had bought in St. Louis. It looked ordinary enough unless a person watched the way she watched it. "That one important?" he asked. "Yes." She did not soften the answer. Gideon looked at her for a second longer, then said, "Then I'll load it where it won't shift." No questions, no teasing, no forced familiarity. Naomi felt some small part of her unclench, which irritated her because she did not yet know whether he deserved the relief. He lifted the larger trunks first. He did not pretend they were light. He did not make a show of their weight either. When he reached for the walnut one, she stepped closer. "I can carry that." "I expect you can," he said, "but the stage driver is about to put a grain sack on top of it." She turned. The driver was, in fact, reaching for a sack. Naomi let go. Gideon carried the trunk himself and set it behind the wagon seat, wedged between a folded blanket and a crate of coffee tins. He pulled the blanket across it before tying the load down. "There," he said, "no grain sack." It was not kindness dressed up for display. It was a practical correction to a practical problem. That made it more dangerous. She climbed into the wagon with care. The boards creaked under her and she braced herself for another glance from him, another small measurement. It did not come. Gideon waited until she was settled, handed her the edge of the lap robe, then climbed up beside her. The town fell behind them slowly. For several minutes there was only the sound of wheels over ruts, harness leather, and the low clink of trace chains. The silence felt stranger than any conversation might have. For 5 months their words had crossed half a continent. His letters had been plain, firm, and unexpectedly thoughtful. He had written about the ranch honestly, the debt on the north pasture, the hard winter that had cost him 21 head of cattle, the way loneliness became worse at supper because a man could keep busy all day and still have no answer for an empty chair. He had not written like a man ordering a wife. That was why she had answered. Now he sat close enough that she could see a scar along one knuckle and the silver beginning near his temples, and she had no idea what to say. Paper had made them brave. Presents made them strangers. At last Gideon said, "You kept my fourth letter." Naomi looked at him. "What makes you think that?" "You quoted from it in your last reply. A line about work being easier when two people stop pretending it is light." "I kept all your letters." His hand stayed steady on the reins, but she saw his shoulders shift slightly. "So did I," he said. The answer was quiet enough that the wind nearly took it. Naomi looked ahead at the open road. "You wrote that Hale Creek Ranch was not beautiful in the usual way," she said. "You said it was useful land." "It is." That sounded like praise. "It was." She almost smiled. "Then I suppose I should reserve judgment until I see it." "You should. Land looks different when you know what it can survive." There it was again. That plain way he had of saying something simple that did not remain simple after it reached her. Naomi folded her gloved hands in her lap. She had told him many truths. She had told him she was 32. She had told him she had been educated in medical science. She had told him she had worked in places where sickness and poverty came through the same door. She had told him she was not delicate, not cheerful by command, and not young enough to mistake hardship for romance. She had not told him she was a physician. Not once in 5 months. She had shaped the truth carefully, like a dose measured to avoid harm. Extensive medical education, practical hospital experience, long familiarity with the care of the sick. Every word was true. The absence between them was also true. The walnut trunk behind the seat held the reason. Inside it, beneath folded linen and 2 winter shawls, lay a compact walnut medicine case with brass corners and a fitted lock. Dr. Elias Pembroke had given it to her the day she completed her training, his old fingers resting on the polished lid as if he were handing over something sacred. A woman will have to keep her tools cleaner than a man, her records sharper, her temper steadier, and her proof twice as visible, he had told her. It is unjust. Do it anyway. Patients need skill more than fairness. The case held corked bottles, clean instrument cloths, a stethoscope, bandages, carbolic solution wrapped against breakage, and the disciplined life she had failed to fit into respectable Eastern rooms. She had locked it away before meeting her husband. That was not an accident. Gideon glanced toward the trunk once, then back to the road. "You traveled with more books than dresses." Naomi turned to him despite herself. "How did you know?" "The green trunk sounds like paper when it shifts." "That is a bold conclusion from a wagon noise." "I listen for small things. Ranching punishes a man who waits for large ones." She studied him for a moment. He did not look proud of the statement. He looked as if it were simple fact. "I brought medical texts," she said carefully, "and a few novels." His mouth moved slightly, not quite a smile. "Which are heavier?" "The medical texts. The novels have better manners." This time he did smile, briefly and with some surprise, as if humor had caught him before he could step aside. The road climbed. Cedar Bluff dropped behind them. The land widened into rough grass, low sage, creek-bottom cottonwoods, and pale ridges under a sky so large it made the east feel suddenly overcrowded in memory. Naomi had lived in rooms where men looked over her shoulder at certificates and still addressed their questions to the nearest male student. She had stood beside hospital beds while patients asked when the real doctor would come. She had watched committees praise her discipline, then give appointments to men whose errors she had corrected in training. and she had learned a terrible lesson. When she said doctor, people stopped seeing Naomi. When they saw her body first, some stopped even sooner. So she had come west under a different arrangement, carrying a hidden title inside a locked case, wanting one person to meet her before the word physician walked into the room ahead of her. It had seemed human when she chose it. Now, sitting beside a man who had kept her letters, it seemed human and dishonest at the same time. Hale Creek Ranch appeared in the late afternoon. First came the creek, narrow and bright between thawing banks, then a long fence line, a barn with a patched roof, a wind-bent cottonwood, and a stone and timber house set with its back to the rise as if bracing against winter. Smoke moved from the chimney. Cattle dotted the lower pasture. A bell sounded somewhere in the distance, dull and patient. "It is useful land," Naomi said. Gideon looked at the ranch, then at her. "Yes." A dog came around the barn, yellow-brown, heavy-footed, with one ear folded and the other upright. He stopped in the yard and stared at the wagon as if he owned the road, the house, and the right to judge all arrivals. "That is Amos," Gideon said. "He takes his time deciding." "Does he bite?" "Not without forming an opinion first." The dog approached when Gideon stopped the wagon. Naomi stepped down slowly and stood still. Amos came close, sniffed the hem of her skirt, her glove, then the wagon wheel. He circled once, looked toward Gideon, then sat beside Naomi's right boot. Gideon stared. Naomi raised one brow. "Has he formed an opinion?" "Apparently." "Is it favorable?" "He hasn't sat beside a stranger since I bought him." "Perhaps he dislikes the word stranger." Gideon looked at her then, more directly than before, and something thoughtful crossed his face. The moment did not last. A hired hand came from the barn to help unload, and the work of arrival began. Naomi watched the walnut trunk until Gideon carried it himself into the house. He set it in the small front room that was to be hers for now. They had agreed on that in letters and again after the courthouse ceremony. A legal marriage did not require immediate claims of comfort neither had earned. She appreciated that he had not pretended otherwise. The room was plain: iron bed, washstand, peg rail, a braided rug faded by years of use. On the table sat a pitcher of clean water, a folded towel, and a small lamp already filled. Gideon stood in the doorway. "I cleared the shelf for your books. If you need more room, I can put up another." She turned from the trunk. "You remembered. You wrote that books left in boxes feel like guests kept on the porch." Naomi looked at him. It had been a foolish little sentence in her second letter, written late at night, when rain tapped the boarding house window, and loneliness had made her less guarded than usual. "I did write that," she said. He nodded, almost awkward now. "Supper S in an hour. I'm not much of a cook, but I don't burn beans every time." "That is a careful recommendation." "It's an honest one." The word honest settled between them with more weight than he could know. He left her then. Naomi waited until his footsteps faded. Then she knelt beside the walnut trunk and rested her hand on the lock. The brass was cold under her fingers. Outside, she could hear Gideon speaking to the hired hand, his voice low, practical, already returning to the ranch's rhythm. She took the key from the hidden pocket inside her traveling skirt. For one moment, she almost opened the trunk. Not to use anything, not to reveal anything, only to reassure herself that the case was still there, that Dr. Naomi Wren had not been lost somewhere between the Eastern Rail Station and this hard, wind-bright place. Instead, she closed her fist around the key. Not yet, she told herself. Downstairs, a floorboard creaked. The house smelled of coffee, wood smoke, and unfamiliar beginnings. Naomi slid the key back into her pocket and stood. Behind her, inside the locked trunk, the brass-cornered medicine case remained hidden, waiting with the patient silence of a truth that could not stay buried forever. The first morning at Hale Creek Ranch began before Naomi thought any decent morning had the right to begin. She woke to a hard rap on her door, the scrape of boots in the hall, and Gideon's voice saying, "Coffee's on. No hurry, but daylight won't wait." "No hurry," he said. The sky outside her window was still black. Naomi sat up slowly, her body stiff from travel and the unfamiliar bed. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then she saw the washstand, the peg rail, the closed walnut trunk at the foot of the bed, and the small square of Montana darkness beyond the glass. Mrs. Hale. The name returned, with the weight of a coat she had not yet learned how to wear. She dressed plainly, pinned her hair with cold fingers, and went downstairs to find Gideon at the stove turning bacon with the grave attention of a man negotiating with an enemy. His sleeves were rolled to the forearm. A pot of coffee sat near the fire, dark and strong enough to smell like warning. Amos lay near the back door, lifted his head when she entered, and thumped his tail once. Gideon glanced over, not down her figure, not away from it either, at her face. "Morning, is it?" He paused, then gave that brief almost smile she had seen once on the wagon road. By ranch standards, yes. By civilized standards, this is the middle of the night. Montana is short on civilization. "So I noticed." He set a plate on the table for her. The food was simple: bacon, beans warmed from the night before, biscuits with a hard edge, and coffee. Naomi sat across from him, aware of the empty chair beside the wall. It was not dusty. That made it worse. A chair kept clean for memory was harder to look at than one abandoned. Gideon saw her notice it. "That was Ruth S.," he said. Naomi looked back at him. "Your first wife." "Yes." There was no invitation in his voice for pity, only fact. She respected that. "I won't sit there unless you ask me to," she said. His hand stilled near his coffee cup. "That wasn't what I meant." "I know, but it may still matter." He looked at her longer than usual. "It does." They ate in a silence that did not feel unfriendly. After breakfast, he showed her the house properly. Pantry, root cellar, pump, wash lines, kindling stack, back porch, ledger desk, and the narrow shelves where he had cleared room for her books. He did not speak as if instructing a servant. He spoke as a man explaining the workings of a place he hoped she might someday help decide. "This door sticks in wet weather," he said, pushing his shoulder against the storeroom door. "The stove draws poorly when the wind comes from the west. If the creek rises, don't try crossing below the cottonwoods. It looks shallow until it is." Naomi listened carefully. She had been good at listening long before she had been allowed to be good at anything else. By mid-morning, she decided to prove useful and made her first serious error. Gideon had gone to check the lower pasture with a hired man named Thomas Pike, a square-faced widower who nodded politely and said little. Naomi found a basket of laundry waiting near the back door and carried it to the wash line. The wind was sharp, the earth uneven, and the wet sheets heavier than expected. In the east, laundry had been difficult. Here it fought like livestock. She pinned one corner successfully. The second corner snapped loose and struck her in the face. The third pin dropped into mud. The whole sheet bellied in the wind, wrapped itself around her shoulder, and nearly pulled her off balance. Naomi planted her boots and said, "This is ridiculous." Amos, sitting nearby, watched with deep interest. "Do not look at me that way," she told him. "You have no hands." The dog wagged his tail. She tried again. The sheet twisted. Her hat slipped. One of her hairpins fell. By the time Gideon returned around the corner of the barn, Naomi was standing with both arms full of damp linen and a look that had once made a senior surgeon take 3 steps backward. Gideon stopped. She waited for amusement. He looked at the sheet, the line, the mud on her hem, and then at Amos. Did he help? Not even slightly. Sounds like him. He walked over and took one edge of the sheet, not from her hands, but from where it had caught around her sleeve. "The trick is to let the wind spend itself first," he said. "I was under the impression wind did not spend itself in this territory." "Not entirely, but sometimes it blinks. They stood together with the wet linen stretched between them. Gideon waited. Naomi waited because he did. A brief lull came, hardly more than a softening. He lifted his side. Now. They pinned it quickly. The sheet held. Naomi looked at it with more satisfaction than laundry deserved. I have assisted in difficult procedures with less resistance. Gideon turned his head. Procedures. She felt the word catch. In hospitals, she said. Linen, supplies, patient rooms, everything resists if badly handled. He accepted the answer, or seemed to, but she saw him store it away. By noon, her arms ached. By afternoon, she had learned that carrying water across a yard required a different rhythm than walking a city pavement. She sloshed half the first bucket onto her skirt and nearly lost the second when Amos crossed in front of her with no apology. Thomas Pike offered to take it from her. Naomi said, "No, thank you." He nodded and did not insist. That helped. Gideon noticed from the barn, but did not intervene. That helped more. By supper she was tired in places she had not known could be tired. Gideon had cooked again, beans made tolerable with onions, bread warmed at the stove, coffee beside the account books. Naomi took her seat and opened one of his ledgers after asking permission. He looked surprised. "You want to read ranch accounts after today?" "I would rather read numbers than fight another sheet." "Fair." His accounts were honest but untidy. Feed costs mixed with household purchases. Cattle losses marked without cause. Payments owed in one column, payments expected in another, but no dates tied cleanly to either. "You keep everything," she said. "I write everything down." "That is not the same thing." He leaned back. That sounded like a diagnosis. It was an observation. "What is the treatment?" "Separate columns, dates, cause of loss, expected payment, actual payment, and never putting coffee, nails, and veterinary powder on the same line unless they were somehow involved in the same disaster." He looked at her, then at the ledger. "There was one time." Naomi glanced up. "A storm took part of the roof off the shed. I needed nails. Coffee kept Thomas awake. The veterinary powder was for a steer that tried to make the storm worse." She pressed her lips together. Gideon's eyes warmed. "You're laughing at my accounting." "I am trying not to. I appreciate the effort." The laughter came then, small but real, and for a moment the kitchen changed. It was still plain. The wind still pressed against the boards. The empty chair still stood by the wall, but the silence no longer owned every corner. After supper, Gideon brought in a wooden box from the porch. "I had this made last month," he said, setting it near the hearth. Naomi looked at it. It was a low step, solid, sanded smooth, wide enough to be stable. "For the wagon?" she asked. "And the back porch. The drop is poor there. I noticed at the station you took extra care stepping down." Heat rose in her face, not from shame exactly, but from being seen in a place she had not chosen to reveal. "You ordered this before I arrived. After your last letter, you wrote that train steps are designed by men who never traveled in skirts." She stared at the box. That had been another small sentence, careless, true. He had remembered. Gideon rested one hand on the back of a chair. "If it offends you, I can put it in the barn." "It does not offend me." You went quiet. "I am deciding what it means." He nodded, accepting that as if it were a reasonable answer. Naomi touched the smooth edge of the step. Her life had taught her that attention often came with judgment attached. This was attention without demand. That was unfamiliar enough to feel almost unsafe. "It means," Gideon said slowly, "that if something in this place makes your day harder and I can fix it, I'd rather fix it than watch you pretend it doesn't." She looked at him then. The room held steady around them. Stove heat, Cooling coffee, the ledger open between their chairs, Amos snoring by the door, the locked truth upstairs under brass and walnut. "Thank you," she said. "You're welcome." Nothing more passed between them, nothing dramatic, nothing that could be mistaken for love. But that night, when Naomi went upstairs, she did not take the key from her pocket. She did not kneel by the trunk. She did not test the lock to be certain her old life remained hidden. For the first time since leaving the East, she simply placed Gideon's letters on the cleared shelf beside her books. Then she stood a long while looking at them, troubled by the dangerous comfort of being remembered. Yet, by the end of Naomi's second week at Hale Creek Ranch, she had learned three things with certainty. Montana Wind had a personal dislike of pinned hair. Coffee could be boiled past bitterness into something closer to punishment. And Gideon Hale's silences were not all the same. There was the silence he used when he was tired. That one sat heavy in his shoulders. There was the silence he used when he was thinking through figures in the ranch ledger. That one made him tap one finger against the table, slow and steady. Then there was the silence he used with Naomi when he wanted to ask something but had decided not to corner her. That silence was the most dangerous. She noticed it one evening while sorting dried beans from small stones at the kitchen table. Gideon sat across from her repairing a leather rein. The lamp between them threw warm light over his hands. Outside, cattle bells moved faintly in the dark. "You have a question," Naomi said. His fingers paused. "I have several. Choose the safest." That nearly won a smile from him. "Were you always this direct?" "No." "What changed?" "I discovered indirect people still found a way to misunderstand me, so I saved time." He pulled the needle through the leather. "That sounds like a story." "It is." "Not one for tonight." "Not yet." He nodded, and there was that restraint again. No pressure. No wounded pride because she had not opened the door wider. He returned to his work. Naomi watched him for a moment longer than necessary. That was becoming a problem. It was not a dramatic problem. No sudden heat, no foolish trembling, no young woman's fantasy. It was worse than that. It was ordinary and slow. She began to know the sound of his boots before he entered a room. She began leaving coffee on the back of the stove at the hour he came in from the pasture. She began noticing when he had skipped noon dinner and quietly setting bread and cold meat, where he would find it without comment. He noticed, too. One afternoon he came into the kitchen, saw the plate waiting and said, "You remembered I forget to eat on branding days. You wrote it in your third letter." "I wrote a lot in that letter." "You did, your spelling also suffered." His brows lifted. "Did it?" "Badly. I was tired. I assumed. Kind of you. I did not say I forgave it." He looked at her then, and the small laugh that left him was rough from disuse. Naomi turned back to the stove before he could see how much it pleased her. The next day, Gideon took her into Cedar Bluff for supplies. The town looked different from the wagon than it had on arrival. Less like an ending, more like a place with habits. The mercantile smelled of flour, molasses, wool, and lamp oil. A pot-bellied stove sat cold in the corner. Shelves climbed to the ceiling, crowded with tins, bolts of cloth, patent medicines, coffee, buttons, nails, and a few books no one had dusted properly. The storekeeper, Mrs. Ada Mercer, was a narrow woman with sharp eyes and a measuring ribbon around her neck. She greeted Gideon warmly enough. Then she turned to Naomi. Her gaze flicked once. Not long, not loud. But Naomi felt it all the same, the familiar sorting. Height, breadth, plain traveling dress let down and brushed for ranch use, gloves mendied at the thumb. Mrs. Mercer's smile adjusted itself. "So this is your bride," she said. Gideon's jaw moved, almost nothing. Naomi set her hand on the counter. "Naomi Hale." Mrs. Mercer blinked at the calm correction. "Of course, welcome to Cedar Bluff." "Thank you." A young man near the cracker barrel coughed into his hand and muttered, not quite softly enough, "Hale ordered sturdy, I guess." The store went still. Naomi did not turn at once. That was the old discipline. Never let them see the hit land. Never give the room the satisfaction of watching you gather yourself. She looked instead at the shelf of corked bottles behind the counter and read the labels without meaning to. Laudanum, castor oil, spirits of camphor, quinine. Then Gideon spoke. "Eli." The young man straightened. He was no more than 20, narrow-faced and red at the ears already. Gideon did not raise his voice. "You owe Mrs. Hale an apology." Eli looked at the floor. "Didn't mean anything by it." That was not an apology. The quiet made the words heavier. Eli swallowed. "Sorry, Mrs. Hale." Naomi turned then. She could have sharpened the moment. She knew how. She had spent years learning language fine enough to cut without leaving a visible mark. Instead, she looked at him, as if he were a patient too young to understand the harm he had done himself. "Accepted," she said. "Do better next time." Eli's face colored deeper. Gideon watched Naomi now, not the young man. There was something in his expression she could not name, not pity. She would have hated pity. This looked more like respect and discomfort standing side by side. Mrs. Mercer cleared her throat and began measuring coffee. The moment should have been over, but Naomi's old memories were not so obedient. As Mrs. Mercer wrapped salt pork in flour, Naomi heard another room beneath this one. Polished floorboards, men in dark coats. A patient's husband asking whether there was a male physician available, not because Naomi had erred, but because her competence had arrived in a body he had not expected authority to occupy. She had told herself the West might be different. That had been foolish. Places did not change people all by themselves. Need did sometimes, hardship did, but not always quickly enough. Outside the mercantile, Gideon loaded supplies without speaking. Naomi placed a packet of needles beside the crate and reached for a sack of flour. Gideon's hand came down on the other end, not taking it from her, only sharing the weight. "I could have carried it," she said. "I know." They lifted it together. After a while he said, "Eli works for the freight office. He talks more than he thinks." That is not rare in young men. "No. I did not require defending." "I didn't think you did." She looked at him. He tied the sack down. "But I won't stand beside a man who insults my wife and pretend I heard nothing. That would make me smaller than him." The answer settled some of the anger in her, though not all. "I have been insulted before," Naomi said. "I figured. I have survived it." "I figured that too." "Then why does it matter to you?" Gideon tightened the rope around the crate. "Because surviving a thing doesn't make the thing acceptable." She had no immediate answer. He climbed onto the wagon seat and reached a hand down, not because she could not climb, but because the step was high and the street was muddy. Naomi considered refusing out of habit. Then she took his hand. His palm was warm and work-rough. He held only long enough to steady her, then let go. On the road home, neither of them spoke for nearly a mile. The sky was pale and open. The wheels struck ruts with a steady jolt. Naomi watched the town shrink behind them and wondered whether Cedar Bluff would ever see more than what came easiest to see. At last Gideon said, "You handled him better than I did." "You handled him fairly." I wanted to say more. "I know. Why didn't you?" "Because you were already angry enough for both of us." That brought his gaze briefly to her. Naomi looked ahead, and because a public correction is useful, a public punishment often teaches only fear. Gideon was quiet for a long moment. "You think on things hard," he said. "I have had to." The words came out before she weighed them. He did not chase them. He simply drove, letting the road carry the rest. By the time they reached Hale Creek, The wind had shifted and the house stood gold in the late light. Amos came out to meet them, judged the groceries uninteresting, and followed Naomi to the porch instead. That evening, after the supplies were stored and the lamp lit, Gideon set a small parcel beside her plate. Naomi looked at it. "What is that?" "Mrs. Mercer had tea in the back. You mentioned in your first letter that hospital coffee had ruined your faith in mankind." "I did write that. I thought tea might help restore it." She unwrapped the paper. Inside was a small tin of black tea, not expensive but carefully chosen. The day had begun with a stranger's careless insult. It ended with Gideon remembering a sentence she had written months ago when she had believed no one might truly keep it. Naomi ran her thumb over the tin lid. If you believe respect is shown in small daily choices, stay with this story, because Naomi's second chance is only beginning. She looked across the table at the man who had seen one unkind moment in town and answered it without making himself the hero of it. "Thank you, Gideon," she said. He looked at her when she used his name, and for one quiet second the practical marriage felt less like paper and more like a door neither of them had opened yet. Upstairs, the locked walnut trunk waited. And for the first time, Naomi was afraid not only of what might happen if Gideon learned the truth, but of what she would lose if he learned it too late. Naomi did not go into Cedar Bluff again for 9 days. She told herself it was because the ranch needed work, and because the weather turned raw, with rain coming sideways across the yard and the creek rising brown against its banks. Those things were true. They were not the whole truth. The remark in the mercantile had not broken her. It had not even surprised her. That was almost the worst of it. A wound one expects still hurts, but it also confirms a bleak little theory one has spent years trying to disprove. So Naomi stayed close to the ranch. She learned the rhythm of the kitchen. She learned which floorboard complained near the stove. She learned that Thomas Pike liked his coffee strong but pretended not to care. She learned that the younger hand, Owen Lark, always rubbed his left wrist before rain and lied badly when asked if it pained him. She also learned that Gideon noticed more than he admitted. On the third wet morning, he came in from the barn and found her standing in the pantry with every jar, sack, and tin arranged on the table. He stopped in the doorway. "Should I be worried?" "That depends on your attachment to disorder. I've lived with it peacefully. That peace has ended." He leaned one shoulder against the doorframe. "I see." Naomi lifted a cloth sack and held it toward him. "This flour is damp at the bottom." His expression changed. He crossed the room and took it from her. "Roof leak." "No, the wall behind the lower shelf sweats when the stove runs hot and the outside air is cold. Anything stored against it will spoil faster." Gideon looked at the wall, then the shelf, then the row of supplies she had already moved. "You found that from flour. And salt and the smell." "What smell?" She gave him a look. He inhaled cautiously. "Damp wood," she said, "a little sourness, not strong yet." "I smelled flour." "You expected flour." He glanced at her. "And you expected trouble." "I usually do." The words were lighter than the truth behind them. Gideon heard that too. She saw it in the way he chose not to answer quickly. "I'll pull the shelf forward," he said at last. "An inch will help, 2 would be better." 2 then. He did it before noon, though he had fencing to check and a lame steer to tend. He did not say she had saved supplies. He did not praise her. He simply made the change and then used the new arrangement as if it had always belonged there. That evening, Naomi entered the expense properly in the ledger: pantry shelf repair, prevention of spoilage. Gideon read the line over her shoulder and said, "You name things like a courthouse clerk." Courthouse clerks would be more useful if they named things clearly. "I won't argue with that." His nearness changed the air beside her. He smelled of rain, leather, and clean sweat from hard work. Naomi kept her eyes on the page longer than the page required. "You improved the account columns," Gideon said. "I made them legible." "That too." He reached past her for the coffee cup he had left on the desk. His sleeve brushed her shoulder. It was nothing. It should have been nothing. Naomi's hand tightened around the pencil. Gideon noticed. Of course he did. But he did not make a moment of it. He only took his cup and moved back toward the stove. She was grateful. She was disappointed. That contradiction troubled her for the rest of the night. 2 days later, the first real health matter presented itself without drama. Owen Lark came in for supper with a grayish tiredness around his mouth and left half his food untouched. Thomas teased him about losing his appetite to homesickness. Owen laughed too quickly and said he was fine. Naomi watched the way he lifted his cup, slow, careful, his wrist again. Then his throat moved when he swallowed and his eyes closed for a fraction too long. "You have a headache," she said. Owen looked up startled. "Ma'am." "And your stomach is unsettled." Gideon's fork paused. Owen shifted on the bench. "It's nothing, just been wet all day." "How long?" "Since morning." "Only you." He shrugged. "Guess so." Thomas frowned. "My stomach was off yesterday." Gideon looked from Thomas to Naomi. She kept her voice even. "What did you both eat that Gideon and I did not?" Owen blinked. Thomas scratched his jaw. "Cold beans from the bunkhouse pot yesterday noon, some ham." "Ham from where?" "Smokehouse." Naomi turned to Gideon. "Has anyone else used that ham?" "Only the hands." "Do not serve more of it." Thomas straightened. "Mrs. Hale, we've eaten stronger than that and lived." "I believe you. That does not make it wise." Owen tried to smile. "You sound like my aunt." Naomi looked at him. "Was your aunt usually right?" The boy considered. "Mostly." "Then honor her memory and drink boiled water tonight. No coffee, no ham, no heavy food. If you worsen, you tell Mr. Hale at once." Gideon studied her across the table. "You think it's the meat." "I think it is the most likely common source." The weather warmed, then turned cold again. If storage was poor or the smokehouse not sealed, it may have spoiled at the edge before the smell gave warning. Thomas's face became more serious. "Did taste strange." Naomi's eyes moved to him. He looked down a little. Gideon stood. "I'll check it." "I'll come," Naomi said. The smokehouse sat behind the kitchen yard, low and dark, with a door that stuck near the bottom. Gideon held the lantern while Naomi examined what she could without touching more than necessary. The air held smoke, salt, old wood, and beneath it a faint wrongness. "There," she said. One side of the hanging ham had softened near the bone. Gideon's mouth tightened. "I missed it." "It was easy to miss." "You didn't." "I was looking for it." He looked at her over the lantern flame. "Why?" "Because the body gives warnings before pride allows a person to speak them," she nearly said. Instead, she answered, "Because two men had the same complaint close together after eating separately from the household. Patterns matter." Gideon lifted the lantern higher. "That sounds like more than household sense." Naomi turned toward the hanging meat. "Households are where many illnesses begin." He did not challenge the answer, but she felt the weight of his attention. The quiet adding up had started again. They disposed of the ham. Naomi insisted the knife be cleaned, the board scrubbed, and the cloths boiled. Gideon did not argue, though Thomas muttered that she was making funeral preparations for a bad supper. By midnight, Owen's stomach cramped hard enough that he stopped pretending. Naomi sat in the bunkhouse with a lamp beside her and asked questions in a voice that made the men answer without knowing why. Where was the pain? Had he vomited? Was he feverish? Could he keep water down? Was his vision clear? Had Thomas worsened? She gave no grand pronouncement. She did not touch her locked case. She used what the house had: boiled water, clean cloth, rest, careful watching, and common sense sharpened by training she did not name. Gideon stood near the door for most of it, arms folded, saying little. At one point Owen groaned and tried to rise too fast. "Stay down," Naomi said. The command was calm, not loud. Owen obeyed. Gideon's eyes shifted to her then. Something in him recognized authority even before he understood its source. Near dawn the worst passed. Owen slept. Thomas, only mildly ill, snored in the next bunk. The rain had stopped and the bunkhouse smelled of damp wool, lamp smoke, and boiled water. Naomi stepped outside into the gray light, tired but steady. Gideon followed her. For a while they stood under the eave and watched the ranch wake. A horse stamped in the barn. Amos came out from beneath the porch, shook rain from his coat, and leaned against Naomi's skirt as if he had been supervising the entire night. "You knew what to watch for," Gideon said. "I knew some things to watch for." That is a careful answer. It is the only honest one. He looked at her when she said honest. Naomi wished she had chosen another word. Gideon took off his hat and ran one hand through his damp hair. He looked exhausted but not displeased. "You kept that boy from making himself worse. I helped him rest and kept him from losing more strength. His body did most of it. Most people take more credit. Most people are poor witnesses." That earned a tired breath that might have been laughter. Then he said, "Naomi." She turned. "Where did you learn to ask questions like that?" The morning seemed to still. She had answers ready. She always had answers ready. Hospitals, training rooms, sick wards, years beside beds no one else wanted to sit beside. 100 truths arranged around the one word she would not give him. At places where people were often too frightened to explain themselves clearly, she said. His gaze held hers. "And you were allowed to help there." Allowed. The word touched something old and sore. "Sometimes," she said. Gideon heard the bitterness she had tried to keep out. His expression changed, not with suspicion now, but with concern he seemed reluctant to show too plainly. Before he could ask more, Thomas called weakly from inside the bunkhouse. "If Mrs. Hale says no more ham, I vote we listen." Owen mumbled, "I vote never seeing ham again." The tension broke. Gideon looked toward the door, then back at Naomi. "You heard the men, no more ham." For now, he agreed. They walked back toward the house together in the first thin light. At the porch, Gideon stopped and opened the door for her. She stepped inside, felt the warmth of the stove, and suddenly understood how close she had come to telling him. Not because he had demanded it. Because he had asked carefully. That was far more dangerous than accusation. Upstairs, the walnut trunk waited in the small front room, its lock cold and clean, guarding the truth she had promised herself she would control. Downstairs, Gideon poured 2 cups of coffee and set one at her place without being asked. Naomi looked from the cup to the man who had begun to trust her judgment without, yet knowing its full cost. And for the first time, hiding the case did not feel like protection. It felt like borrowing trust she had not fully earned. Yet, after the spoiled ham, Gideon began asking Naomi's opinion in small ways that did not sound small to her. Not loudly, not in front of the men as if displaying a clever new possession. He would stop at the kitchen door with a question about water storage. He would leave a note beside the ledger asking whether she thought the bunkhouse blankets should be aired more often in damp weather. He would mention, as if by chance, that Owen's wrist had swollen again after rain. Naomi answered what she could. She avoided what came too near the locked truth. That became harder each day. The ranch settled into a pattern around her. She rose before sunrise now, though she still believed dawn arrived with unreasonable confidence. She learned to bank the stove, to sort the accounts, to manage the pantry, to speak to Thomas Pike in direct sentences because he distrusted anything decorated. She learned that Owen sang badly when he curried horses, and that Amos preferred sleeping across doorways, making himself a moral and physical obstacle. She also learned Gideon's weather. When he was worried about money, he read the ledger twice and closed it too carefully. When he remembered Ruth, he touched the back of the empty chair without seeming to know he had done it. When he was amused, he looked down first, as if laughter were something private he had to decide whether to share. One evening near the end of April, she found him in the barn trying to wrap a poultice around Owen's horse, a bay mare with a tender leg and no patience for sympathy. "You are doing that backward," Naomi said from the doorway. Gideon glanced over his shoulder. "I suspected as much." The mare suspected it first. "She has been expressing that." The horse stamped. Naomi stepped inside and stopped several feet away, careful not to enter the animal's space too quickly. Horses still made her uneasy. They were large, nervous, and not interested in reason. She preferred patients who could answer questions, though she had known several who did so worse than horses. Gideon noticed her hesitation. "She won't harm you if I hold her," he said. "That is not the same as saying she approves of me." "No, she approves of very little." Naomi came closer. Gideon kept one hand on the mare's halter, his voice low, not sweet, simply steady. Naomi watched the animal's ear turn toward him. "There," Naomi said. "Fold the cloth flatter before you bind it. You're making pressure where you don't need pressure." "You know horses, too." "No, I know swelling and bandages." The sentence landed between them. Gideon's hand slowed. Naomi reached for the strip of cloth before he could ask anything. "May I?" He gave it to her. She stood near the mare's leg, aware of every shift in the animal's weight. Gideon bent slightly, his shoulder close to hers, holding the mare steady. Naomi folded the cloth cleanly, set it where it would support without pinching, and guided the wrap around with firm, even tension. "There," she said, "not perfect but kinder." Gideon studied the work. "Looks better than mine." Most things do when they stop fighting their purpose. He turned his head. They were close enough that she could see the pale lines at the corners of his eyes. Close enough that she remembered he was not only a practical man and a widower and a rancher with debts. He was also her husband. The thought disturbed her hands. The mare shifted. Naomi stepped back too quickly and struck her shoulder against a stall post. Gideon reached out, then stopped before touching her. "You all right?" "Yes." "You moved fast." "I prefer not to be under a horse." "That's sensible." "I am full of sense." This time he did smile. "You're full of something." She looked at him sharply. His face remained solemn, but his eyes betrayed him. Naomi laughed before she could stop herself. The sound startled the mare. It startled Naomi more. Gideon looked pleased in a quiet, almost boyish way that made her chest ache. Then he looked away first, giving her the mercy of not being watched too closely. Later that night, they sat at the kitchen table with coffee cooling beside the ranch ledgers. Rain ticked softly against the window. Amos slept with his head on Naomi's boot. Gideon rubbed one hand over his jaw. "I'm thinking of selling 6 head early." Naomi looked up, "Because of the North Pasture debt." He paused. "You read that far?" "You gave me the ledger." "I did." "Did you expect me not to understand it?" "No." She waited. He exhaled. "Maybe." "I see. That came out poorly." "It came out honestly." Gideon leaned back. "I didn't mean you lacked understanding. I meant it has taken me years to know which numbers matter and which only look loud on paper." "That is fair." "You're not angry." "I dislike being underestimated. I do not dislike being told a subject has local rules I may not know." He studied her, That distinction matters to you. Yes. Why? Naomi's pencil rested between her fingers. The question was simple. The answer was not. Because people often use the second thing as a disguise for the first, she said. They tell a woman she does not understand local rules when what they mean is they do not intend to let her learn them. Gideon absorbed that without the defensive flinch she expected. Then I'll try to be clearer, he said. She looked at him. Not I did not mean it, though he had not. Not you misunderstood, though she had not. Not a lecture about his intentions. I'll try to be clearer. It was a small repair made before the tear widened. Naomi turned back to the ledger because looking at him had become too difficult. If you sell 6 head now, she said, you will ease the debt, but you may regret it if spring grass comes strong. And if it does, then regret will arrive from the other direction. That is not advice. It is accurate. He gave a low breath. You would have made a merciless banker. I would have been rejected for the position. The words escaped too quickly. Gideon grew still. Naomi kept her eyes on the numbers. Rejected because you're a woman, he asked. She felt the old rooms gather around her. White walls, neat desks, men praising her mind in private and closing doors in public, patients who trusted her until someone else told them not to. Among other reasons, she said. What other reasons? She lifted her gaze then. He understood before she answered, not all of it, enough. A shadow crossed his face, not pity, not quite anger. Naomi. She stood, gathering the cups. The cattle figures would be better judged after another week of pasture growth. He let her leave the subject. That was mercy. It was also another debt. The next morning, a letter arrived with the supply wagon from town. It was addressed to Mrs. Naomi Hale in a hand she recognized at once. Dr. Elias Pembroke. Her mentor's script was thin now, less steady than it had once been, but still precise. Naomi carried the letter upstairs before opening it. Dear Naomi, I hope the West gives you what the East did not have the courage to offer. I have wondered whether you have told your husband yet. Forgive an old man's bluntness, but secrecy is a poor disinfectant. It keeps shame alive in dark corners. You earned your title. You may choose where and how to use it, but do not let fear teach you to bury it so deep that even love cannot find it. She sat on the bed for a long time after reading. Below her, Gideon's voice carried faintly from the yard. A wagon chain clinked. Amos barked once. Ordinary life continued beneath an extraordinary sentence. Do not let fear teach you to bury it so deep that even love cannot find it. Naomi folded the letter and placed it beside the others, then turned toward the walnut trunk. The key was in her pocket. Her hand went to it before she decided to move. This time she knelt. The lock opened with a small, clean click. Inside lay linen, shawls, a stack of books, and beneath them the brass-cornered medicine case. The walnut lid had taken a few scratches from travel. The brass had dulled at the edges. She rested both hands on it and felt with painful clarity that she was not touching a secret. She was touching herself. A knock sounded at the door. Naomi froze. Naomi, Gideon called from the hall. Supply wagon brought a crate with a cracked bottle. Smells like camphor. Thought you might know whether it can be saved. Her hands remained on the medicine case. One turn of the latch and he would see it. One honest word and the waiting would end by her choice, not by accident. She opened her mouth. The truth rose to the edge. Then fear, old and practiced, closed around it. I'll be down in a moment, she said. Her voice sounded calm, a physician's voice, a liar's voice. She shut the trunk, turned the key, and pressed her palm against the lid until her breathing steadied. When she went downstairs, Gideon was waiting by the back door with the broken crate at his feet and trust still unguarded in his face. Naomi looked at him. and understood that the locked case upstairs was no longer only hiding her from judgment. It was standing between them. And every day she left it there, the space grew harder to cross. Yes. The storm came down from the north, without much warning. By noon, the sky over Hale Creek had lowered into a hard gray lid, and the wind pushed dust ahead of it in thin, restless sheets. Gideon sent Thomas and Owen to secure the loose boards on the hay shed while he checked the lower gate near the creek. Naomi stood at the kitchen window and watched the cottonwoods bend. She had never trusted whether that arrived quietly. By mid-afternoon, rain struck the roof hard enough to drown the small sounds of the house. Amos paced from the back door to the front room, uneasy. Naomi had just finished tying the pantry sacks higher from the floor when she heard a shout outside. Not a ranch shout. A wrong one. She reached the porch as Gideon came running from the barn. A buckboard lurched into the yard behind a frightened team, one wheel wobbling badly. Thomas was driving, soaked through, face pale beneath his hat. Beside him, Owen held a man upright with both arms. "It's Mr. Vale from the stage road," Thomas called. "Wagon tipped near the creek crossing." The injured man slumped forward. Naomi was already moving. "Bring him inside," she said. Gideon turned sharply at the tone. Not wife, not housekeeper, not even the careful woman who asked too many precise questions. Something older had entered her voice. Thomas and Gideon helped the man down. He was perhaps 40, bearded, heavy with rain, breathing in short, guarded pulls. His right leg was twisted beneath him in a way that made Naomi's mind go cold and clear. One arm hung close to his side. His face had the gray, sweating look of pain that could carry a man into shock if no one paid attention. "Kitchen table," Naomi said. "Blankets first. Owen, heat water. Thomas, bring the cleanest lantern and set it high. Gideon, don't let him walk, lift him." No one moved for half a second. Then Gideon said, "Do as she says." That saved the moment. They carried Mr. Vale inside. Rain blew through the open door before Amos shouldered it shut with his body. Naomi pulled the kitchen lamp closer and began asking questions before the man had settled. "Your name?" "Samuel Vale." "Do you know where you are?" "Hale Place." "Did you strike your head?" "Don't think so." "Any trouble seeing? Any sickness in your stomach?" "No, leg hurts something fierce." "I know." Gideon watched her hands. She did not fumble. She did not soothe falsely. She cut away the wet trouser cloth near the injured leg only as much as needed, keeping the rest covered with a blanket. The injury was serious. Likely a fracture, perhaps not simple, swelling already building. If the limb was handled carelessly, the damage could worsen. Cedar Bluff's regular doctor was miles away, and in this weather he might as well have been in another territory. Naomi looked at the leg, the man's color, the trembling in his hands, and the useless hope of waiting. The locked walnut trunk seemed suddenly as loud as thunder overhead. "Protect the secret. Protect the patient." There was no choice. Only the last second before paying for it. "Gideon," she said. He looked at her. "In my room, beside the bed, there is a walnut trunk. The key is in my skirt pocket. Take it. Open the trunk. Beneath the folded shawls there is a brass-cornered medicine case. Bring it to me without turning it over." The kitchen became very still. Only the rain kept speaking. Gideon's eyes held hers. In them she saw the first full shape of understanding begin, not complete yet, but rising. Then he stepped close. Naomi took the key from her pocket and placed it in his palm. Their fingers touched once. He went upstairs. Samuel Vale groaned. Naomi bent over him. "Mr. Vale, listen to me. I can help you, but I will not lie. This will hurt, and I need you to stay as still as you can. Have you taken spirits today?" "No." "Good. Any allergy to laudanum that you know of?" He tried to laugh and failed. "Ma'am, I barely know what that is." It is for pain. I will use only what is needful. Gideon returned carrying the walnut medicine case. He set it on the table. Naomi opened it. The brass hinges lifted with a small sound she knew better than any hymn. Inside lay order, corked bottles wrapped in cloth, bandages rolled tight, clean linen, a stethoscope, a small packet of prepared splints, instruments secured in their proper places. Not much, not enough for everything, enough for this if God and judgment stayed near. Owen stared. Thomas took off his hat without knowing he had done it. Gideon did not look at the men. He looked at Naomi. She felt him see the difference, the way her shoulders settled, the way her fear narrowed into purpose, the way the hidden part of her did not look hidden at all once called into use. "Wash your hands," she said. "All of you, soap, hot water, clean towels only. Thomas, hold the lamp steady. Owen, I need strips torn from boiled linen, not from any cloth you find lying about. Gideon, stand at his shoulder and keep him talking. If his speech wanders, tell me." Gideon obeyed without a word. Naomi worked. She gave a careful dose for pain and waited long enough for it to take some edge from Mr. Vale's suffering without clouding him past usefulness. She checked his foot for warmth and feeling. She asked him to move his toes. She listened to his breathing. She examined the arm and decided it was bruised but not the immediate danger. She explained each step in plain words, not to impress anyone, but because frightened patients deserved to know what was being done to them. "I believe your leg is broken," she said. "I cannot promise the exact nature without more than I have here. I can set it well enough to give you a chance of proper healing until a longer journey is safe. I will stop if I find something beyond my ability in this room. Do you understand me?" Samuel Vale's eyes fixed on her. "Are you a doctor?" Naomi's hands did not stop. "Yes," she said, "I am." No one breathed loudly enough to be heard. Then Gideon looked down. Not away from her. Down at the man he was holding steady. "Listen to Dr. Hale," he said quietly. The name passed through Naomi like pain and mercy together. She did not let it shake her hands. The setting of the leg was hard, controlled, and mercifully brief. Naomi's face stayed calm. Samuel cried out once, and Gideon kept his grip firm without roughness, speaking low near the man's ear about the creek road, about the team being safe, about rain not lasting forever, though Montana often lied on that point. Naomi splinted the leg with care. She bound it firmly, checked the foot again, adjusted pressure, and marked in her mind what must be watched through the night: color, heat, pain, swelling, fever, confusion, breathing. When it was done, she sat back only long enough to draw one breath. His leg must stay raised. No weight on it. He should not be moved to Cedar Bluff tonight in this weather. The road will do more harm than waiting. We keep him here and send for Dr. Arlen at first light if the creek is passable. Thomas nodded quickly. Owen still looked stunned. Gideon said, "Thomas, ride to the Vale place if the upper trail is safe. Tell his wife he's alive, tended, and staying here. If it's not safe, you turn back. No heroics." Thomas grabbed his hat and went. Naomi cleaned the instruments immediately. She used carbolic solution sparingly and carefully, boiled what should be boiled, wiped the case edges, and counted every item before placing it back. The familiar order steadied her. The work after the work always mattered. Samuel Vale drifted into exhausted sleep on a cot they made near the stove. Owen went to tend the horses. The kitchen quieted. Only then did Naomi realize Gideon had not moved from the far side of the table. His coat was wet, his sleeves were rolled, his hands were clean but still tense from holding another man through pain. His eyes rested on the open medicine case. Not curious now. Not mildly suspicious. Certain. Naomi closed the last bottle and set it into its fitted place. She did not shut the lid. Not yet. The truth had come out of the trunk. Closing the case would not put it back. Gideon looked from the brass corners to her face. "You said medical education," he said. His voice was quiet. Yes. You said hospital experience. Yes. You did not say physician. No. The rain struck the windows, hard and steady. Naomi stood with both hands on the edge of the table. I should have. He absorbed that without expression. In the cot near the stove, Samuel Vale slept because she had known what to do. In the doorway, her husband stood because he had just learned what she had hidden. No accusation came. No anger. That would have been easier. Gideon only looked at the open case, then at her hands, then at her face with an injured stillness that made Naomi wish, too late, that courage had come before necessity. After a long moment, he said, I'll sit with Mr. Vale first. Then he took the chair beside the patient, leaving Naomi standing beside the uncovered life she had carried into his house. Tell me in the comments whether you think Naomi should have told him sooner, because from here, the hardest wound in this house may not be the broken leg. And Gideon Hale, who had just called her doctor in front of another man, did not look at his wife again for the rest of the night. Morning came gray, wet, and careful. Samuel Vale woke before sunrise with pain in his leg but clear eyes and steady speech. Naomi checked the splint, the color of his foot, the warmth of his skin, and the swelling around the bindings. She did everything in measured order while Gideon stood by the stove pouring coffee into 2 cups he did not drink. Neither of them spoke beyond what the patient required. That silence had edges now. At first light, Thomas returned from the upper trail, soaked and mud-streaked but safe. He had reached the Vale place. Samuel's wife would come once the rain slowed. The creek road was still bad, and Dr. Arlen from Cedar Bluff could not be fetched until the crossing dropped. Naomi accepted this with a nod. Then we watch him here. We, Gideon asked. It was the first word he had directed at her since the night before. She turned from the cot. Yes, she said, unless you object to my continuing his care. Samuel Vale looked from one to the other and wisely closed his eyes. Gideon's face did not change. I object to nothing that keeps him alive and whole. The words were fair. They were also cold. Naomi washed her hands at the basin until the water turned cloudy with soap. She dried them on a clean towel and folded it once, twice, more carefully than needed. I will write instructions for the day, she said. Fine. She went to the desk and took out paper. The pencil felt heavy. For months, Gideon's handwriting had traveled east to her in firm, unadorned lines. He had told her the truth about a lonely ranch, hard work, old grief and debt that embarrassed him but did not defeat him. She had answered with careful truths and one chosen silence. Last night, the silence had opened itself in front of him with brass hinges and clean instruments. Now every honest thing she had said seemed bruised by the one thing she had not. Mrs. Vale arrived near noon in a neighbor's wagon, wrapped in a shawl and trying not to weep. Naomi met her at the door and explained Samuel's condition without pretending certainty she did not have. His leg is set and splinted. He has feeling in the foot, which is good. He must not put weight on it. Dr. Arlen should examine him when the road allows. I will not move him through that crossing today unless his condition worsens. Mrs. Vale stared at her. You are Mr. Hale's wife. Yes. And you did all this. Yes. 100 old rooms waited inside that question. Naomi kept her voice calm. I am a physician, Mrs. Vale. The woman blinked. Her eyes moved once to Gideon, who stood behind Naomi near the stove. Gideon said, Dr. Hale tended him. Dr. Hale. Again. This time it hurt more. Mrs. Vale's face shifted from confusion to desperate hope. Then tell me what to do. Naomi did. She gave plain instructions. She showed how to watch for swelling, fever, numbness, and worsening pain. She explained which signs required immediate help. Mrs. Vale listened like a woman accepting rope in deep water. By late afternoon, Samuel was sleeping. Mrs. Vale sat beside him, and the rain had eased into mist. Naomi stepped onto the back porch for air. The yard was mud. The clouds hung low over the barn roof. Water dripped from the eaves in steady lines. She had slept perhaps 1 hour, and her body felt hollow from work and dread. The door opened behind her. Gideon came out and closed it softly. For a while neither spoke. Then he said, "You are good." Naomi kept her eyes on the yard. "At medicine," he added, as if precision mattered. "It does not feel like praise right now. It is not meant to settle anything." "No. I watched you last night," he said. "You knew where every item was in that case before you touched it. You knew what Samuel needed before the rest of us understood how frightened we ought to be. I have seen men with titles do less with more." Naomi's throat tightened. "Gideon, I am not angry because you are a doctor." She closed her eyes briefly. There it was. The mercy and the wound together. "I know," she said. "Do you?" She turned then. His face was controlled, but his eyes were not as cold as his voice had been that morning. They were tired, hurt, trying to remain fair. "I think so," she said. "I need you to know it clearly. If you had written to me and said, 'I am a physician,' I might have been surprised. I might have asked questions. I would not have burned the letter." "No. But you did not give me the chance to answer truth with truth." She looked down at her hands. They were clean, but the smell of carbolic still clung faintly to her skin. "I was afraid," she said. "I believe that. And I had reasons. I believe that too." She looked at him. He leaned one shoulder against the porch post, as if standing fully upright took too much effort. "But reasons do not make the hurt disappear." "No," she said, "they do not." The answer seemed to cost him something because his jaw tightened once, then eased. Naomi took a breath. "In my letters I told you I had medical education. I told you I worked around hospitals. I told myself that was enough truth." "It was." "No. You knew it wasn't then." She did not defend herself. "Yes." The porch boards creaked under his shifting weight. Naomi forced herself to continue. "I wanted you to know me before you knew the title. I wanted one person to look at me and not immediately begin rearranging me into some oddity, some argument, some exception that had to be judged before it could be understood." Gideon listened without interruption. "That was what happened in the East," she said. "Not every time, not every man, not every patient, but often enough that disclosure became something I learned to brace against. A woman doctor was already difficult for them. A woman doctor who looked like me made them decide even faster. Some were polite. Some were embarrassed. Some praised me in private and chose someone else in public. After a while, the word doctor stopped feeling like a title I had earned and started feeling like a door that closed before I reached it." Her voice stayed even. She was proud of that. Gideon was quiet. Naomi looked toward the wet pasture. "When your letters came, you sounded like a man who valued what a person did more than how they appeared. I wanted that to be true so badly that I tried to protect it by hiding the one thing most likely to test it." "That was not trust," Gideon said. "No. It was control." The word struck hard because it was accurate. Naomi swallowed. "Yes." His eyes softened by a fraction, though his mouth did not. "You don't have to agree with me just because you feel guilty." "I am not." "Then what are you doing?" "Trying not to make my wound larger than yours." He looked away then. For the first time since the night before, his control almost broke. Naomi's voice lowered. "I had reasons. I still believe they were real. But I should have trusted you enough to tell you before the truth had to enter this house on a broken man's leg." The porch was silent except for dripping rain. Gideon looked at her again, and there was pain in him she had not caused and pain she had. She could not yet tell where one ended and the other began. "I don't know what to do with this," he said. "I know. I called you Dr. Hale in there because Mrs. Vale needed certainty, and because you earned the name before I ever knew it." Naomi's eyes burned. "But part of me hated learning it that way," he said. "In my own kitchen, in front of frightened people, with your whole life opening on the table like something I had no right to ask about because I should have already known." She nodded once. "I am sorry," she said. He did not answer quickly. That was fair, too. Inside, Samuel Vale stirred and Mrs. Vale murmured to him. Ordinary human need returned, as it always did, interrupting even the pain that felt most private. Gideon stepped back from the porch rail. "I'll hitch the wagon when Dr. Arlen can be fetched." "Thank you." He opened the door, then stopped. "Naomi." She turned. "I still want the truth. Not all at once if you can't manage it, but no more careful absences." "No more," she said. He nodded and went inside. Naomi remained on the porch a moment longer, breathing the wet air. She had confessed enough to wound herself, not enough to heal them. That night, after Samuel Vale slept and Mrs. Vale dozed in the chair, Naomi carried the brass-cornered medicine case upstairs. She did not lock it inside the trunk. She set it on the table beside her medical books. Then she sat on the bed across from it, watching the lamplight touch the brass corners, and understood that the case was no longer hidden from Gideon. The harder task would be not hiding behind it. Dr. Arlen came the next afternoon in a mud-spattered buggy with his collar turned up against the damp, and his black bag wedged beside him on the seat. He was older than Naomi expected, with a round face, tired eyes, and hands that trembled slightly when he climbed down. Gideon met him in the yard. Naomi stood in the kitchen doorway, the brass-cornered medicine case resting closed on the side table behind her. Dr. Arlen wiped rain from his hat and looked at her. "Mrs. Hale?" "Yes." "I'm told you set Samuel Vale's leg." "I stabilized it and splinted it. I would like your examination before he is moved." The physician's eyes sharpened, not unkindly, not warmly either. "Would you?" "Yes." Gideon said nothing. Naomi could feel his silence beside her, different again. Watchful, not defending her, not withdrawing either. Dr. Arlen entered and examined Samuel with slow care. Naomi stood back unless asked. She did not crowd him. She did not perform her knowledge. Samuel answered questions. Mrs. Vale sat near the cot, twisting a handkerchief in both hands. At last Dr. Arlen straightened. "The splint is sound," he said. "Better than many I've seen done by men who should know better." Mrs. Vale let out a breath that was almost a sob. Samuel looked toward Naomi. "Told you she knew." Dr. Arlen turned to her. "Where did you train?" Naomi felt the room tighten. "Women's Medical College in Philadelphia," she said. "Then clinical work in New York and private practice after." The old doctor's brows rose. "You hold a degree?" "Yes." The question was plain. The sting came from how many times she had been required to prove the answer before being allowed ordinary professional ground. Dr. Arlen seemed to understand some part of that because he gave a short nod. Then Cedar Bluff has gained more than gossip suggested. Gideon's eyes moved to him. Naomi kept her face still. What did gossip suggest? Dr. Arlen looked briefly embarrassed. That Hale had brought home an educated wife with firm opinions. "That part is true." A small sound came from Gideon, almost a laugh, almost pain. Dr. Arlen looked between them. Wise enough not to step further into a married silence he had not been invited to examine. By evening, Samuel Vale was moved carefully to the wagon under both doctors' instruction. Dr. Arlen promised to visit the Vale place the next day. Mrs. Vale caught Naomi's hand before leaving. "You saved him from worse," she said. I helped him until more help came. The woman shook her head. You stayed, that matters too. After the wagon rolled away, the ranch seemed too quiet. Thomas and Owen returned to the barn. Amos lay under the porch. The wet yard held deep wheel tracks. Naomi carried the used cloths to the wash basin, though there was little left to do. Gideon stood near the stove. You don't have to clean everything twice, he said. I do if it was used near a patient. I meant because you're upset. She stopped. The cloth in her hands dripped into the basin. I am not upset by work. No, Gideon said, you hide in it. The words might have angered her on another day. This time she could not deny them. She wrung the cloth slowly, and you hide in silence. Yes. The admission came so plainly that she looked at him. He was watching the floorboards, not her. The late light through the window cut across his face and showed the fatigue there. He had not slept properly since the accident. Neither had she. I need to tell you something, he said. Naomi dried her hands. All right. He glanced toward the empty chair by the wall. Ruth's chair. Then he looked away from it. She died in this house, he said. Not sudden, not violent, nothing a story would make large. He swallowed once. It started as a fever after a cut on her hand, small thing. She was making preserves, glass jar broke. She laughed about it because I made too much fuss. Naomi stood very still. I rode for a doctor, Gideon said. He came late, looked at her hand, said women take fevers badly sometimes. Told me to keep her warm, said it would pass. His voice remained low, but every word seemed pulled over stone. It didn't. Naomi did not interrupt. She worsened, I knew it. I could see she was not right, but I had no words for what I was seeing. The doctor came again and said I was tired and frightened. He said grief starts before death in husbands who worry too much. Gideon's mouth tightened. She was still alive when he said that. Naomi felt the full cruelty of careless authority settle into the room. By the time another man came from a town farther south, there was little to do. Infection had gone too far. Ruth knew it before I did. She kept apologizing for leaving work behind. His hand closed around the back of the chair nearest him. I trusted the first doctor because he sounded certain, Gideon said. I hated him after. I hated myself more. Naomi's throat ached. Gideon. When I watched you with Samuel, you did not sound certain just to comfort yourself. You said what you knew. You said what you did not know. You checked again. You watched his color, his foot, his speech. You did not dismiss pain because it was inconvenient. His eyes lifted to hers then. That is what struck me hardest. Not the instruments, not the title, the listening. Naomi could not speak at once. Gideon looked toward the window. Part of me was angry that you hid the truth. Part of me was standing there thinking, Ruth needed someone like this. The room seemed to narrow around both of them. I am sorry, Naomi said softly. He shook his head once. Don't make it yours. I can be sorry without claiming it. That made him look back at her. She held his gaze, and I can understand why last night hurt more than I knew. His face changed, only slightly, enough. I have disliked doctors for years, he said. Not all, that would be childish, but enough that I hear confidence and wonder what it is covering. Then I find out my wife is one and she never trusted me with it. I did trust you with parts of myself. Yes. Not enough. No. The truth no longer struck like accusation. It lay between them, heavy but shared. Naomi moved to the table and sat. After a moment, Gideon sat across from her. The same table where ledgers had been corrected, coffee had cooled, and Samuel Vale's life had changed the shape of their marriage. I thought if I told you, she said, the word doctor would stand between us before I did. And by not telling me, it stands between us now. Yes. He rubbed both hands over his face. I don't want to punish you. You are not. I'm not ready to pretend there is no damage. I am not asking you to. That helps, he said. It was not forgiveness. It was not closeness. It was one board laid across a deep place. Naomi took a slow breath. Dr. Pembroke, my mentor, wrote that secrecy is a poor disinfectant. Gideon looked at her. Sounds like a doctor. He was one. Was he right? Naomi looked toward the side table, where the medicine case sat closed but not hidden. Yes. For the first time since the accident, Gideon's gaze rested on the case without hurt alone. There was hurt still, but also recognition of work, history, discipline, and need. What do you want to do now? He asked. It was not a husband granting permission. It was a man asking the question he should have been allowed to ask months before. Naomi answered carefully. Tonight, I want to sleep. Tomorrow, I want to write Dr. Arlen and ask what Cedar Bluff lacks most. Then I want to decide what I can honestly offer and what I cannot. Gideon nodded. And us, he asked. She looked at him across the table. There were easy answers, sweet ones, useless ones. I want to stop earning your affection by being less than I am, she said. And I want to stop expecting you to prove you are different while I deny you the chance to choose. He sat with that for a long moment. Then he said, I want to know my wife. Naomi's eyes burned, but she did not look away. All of her, he added. Outside, the last of the storm water dripped from the roof into the mud. Inside, the brass-cornered case sat in lamplight, no longer buried, not yet at home. Gideon rose first. At the doorway he paused. Naomi. Yes. I still dislike what you hid. I know. And I respect what you are. Both truths stood together. Neither erased the other. After he left, Naomi sat alone at the table until the lamp burned low, not healed, not forgiven entirely, but no longer divided in quite the same way she had been that morning. Word moved through Cedar Bluff in the usual frontier way. Not fast like a newspaper, not official like a notice nailed beside the mercantile door. It moved by wagon seats, church steps, flour barrels, borrowed tools, and women speaking softly while their hands stayed busy. Samuel Vale's wagon had overturned near Hale Creek. Samuel Vale's leg had been set at Gideon Hale's kitchen table. Samuel Vale had not been ruined for work, at least not if healing continued. And the person who had done the setting was not Dr. Arlen. It was Gideon Hale's new wife. No, not merely his wife. A woman doctor. Naomi heard the first version of it from Owen, who tried to report it casually while carrying wood to the back porch. Mrs. Mercer says folks are asking questions in town, he said. Naomi took the split logs from him and stacked them beside the stove. Folks generally do. About you. I assumed. Owen shifted his weight. His wrist was wrapped the way she had shown him, firm but not too tight. Some say it's strange, some say it lucky. And what do you say? His ears reddened. I say Mr. Vale kept his leg because you knew more than the rest of us. Naomi looked at him. The boy studied the floor as if it had suddenly become medically interesting. That is enough, she said gently. He nodded once, relieved, and escaped through the door. The first patient came that same evening. Not through any formal request, not even with confidence. A woman named Lydia Price arrived in a mud-splashed cart with her younger sister beside her, both of them tense from the journey and from the awkwardness of what they had come to ask. Gideon was in the barn. Naomi met them on the porch with Amos standing beside her like a severe assistant. I'm sorry to trouble you, Lydia said, twisting the reins in her gloved hands. My sister's been coughing since last week. Dr. Arlen is away toward the mining camp until Friday. Mrs. Vale said you might know whether it's serious. Naomi felt the old instinct rise. Step forward. Step back. Hide. Help. She opened the door wider. Bring her in. The younger woman, Mabel, was 19 or 20, pale with a flushed line high across her cheeks. Naomi examined her in the front room, not the kitchen. She asked careful questions. She listened to the girls breathing with her stethoscope after explaining what it was and asking permission. She checked for fever, looked at the throat, asked about sleep, appetite, chest pain, and whether anyone else in the household was ill. Gideon came in halfway through, stopped at the sight of the open medicine case on the table, then removed his hat and stepped back without a word. Naomi noticed that. So did Lydia. When Naomi finished, she gave no dramatic conclusion. I do not hear the sounds I would fear most today. That is good. But she needs rest, warm fluids, and watching. If breathing worsens, if fever rises, or if pain comes with each breath, you send for Dr. Arlen or for me. Do not wait because you feel foolish. Lydia's face changed at that. I was told last year I worried too much, she said. Sometimes worry is information arriving before certainty, Naomi replied. We still test it, but we do not mock it. Mabel's eyes filled unexpectedly. Naomi looked down to write instructions in pencil, so the girl could recover her dignity. The women left with a packet of simple supplies, a folded note, and less fear than they had carried in. Gideon watched from the porch as their cart moved down the track. That was the first, he said. Naomi stood beside him, perhaps the only. No. She looked at him. He did not look pleased exactly. He looked resigned to a truth arriving with its own chores. You helped one man where people could see the result. Folks here remember usefulness. They also remember difference. They do. He did not soften it, and she appreciated that. By the following week, 2 more visitors came. One was a freighter with an infected finger he had ignored too long because the regular doctor was away, and because men often believed pride could serve as treatment. Naomi cleaned it, dressed it, and told him plainly he could lose the use of it if he kept pretending it was nothing. He paid with 2 silver coins and a sack of coffee, then addressed her as ma'am on the way in and doctor on the way out. The second was Mrs. Mercer from the store. She arrived at noon in her own buggy, stiff-backed and embarrassed, with a headache that had lasted 3 days. Naomi invited her in without reminding her of the first meeting in the mercantile. She took the complaint seriously. She asked about vision, food, sleep, monthly troubles, stress, water, and the tightness of the woman's collar. Mrs. Mercer gave a brittle laugh. You ask more questions than Dr. Arlen. Then you may blame me in more detail if my advice proves useless. That startled the storekeeper into a real smile. The headache did not require any miracle. Rest, water, loosening the collar, less skipped food, and watching for changes. Mrs. Mercer looked almost disappointed by the plainness of it. I expected something stronger, she admitted. Many people do. Stronger is not always wiser. Mrs. Mercer folded her gloves. People are talking. So I hear. Some are unkind. I assumed. The storekeeper looked uncomfortable. Some are grateful too. That is better. I may have judged you too quickly when you came into the store. Naomi met her gaze. Yes. Mrs. Mercer blinked. Naomi let the word stand without anger. After a moment, the woman nodded. Yes, I did. That mattered more than an over-decorated apology. If Naomi's second chance means something to you, stay with this frontier story, because respect in Cedar Bluff will not arrive in one grand speech. It will arrive one honest need at a time. The patients changed the ranch. Not all at once, but enough that Gideon noticed before Naomi let herself name it. Supper ran late when someone came near dusk. Clean cloth disappeared faster. The kettle boiled at odd hours. The side table in the front room began holding pencil notes, folded instructions, and one small jar labeled for Mrs. Vale's next visit. Naomi tried to manage it without disturbing the ranch's order. Gideon made that impossible by quietly changing the order himself. He moved the spare lamp from the storeroom to the front room. He asked Thomas to make a narrow shelf above the table. He brought a basin from the bunkhouse, scrubbed it clean, and set it near the door. He placed a peg on the wall for her apron and said only, it was lying over chair backs. One morning, Naomi found the wagon hitched earlier than usual. "Are we going somewhere?" she asked. "Cedar Bluff." "I did not ask to go." "No, Dr. Arlen did." She stilled. Gideon handed her a folded note. Dr. Arlen's message was brief. A child at the boarding house had a fever he wanted another set of eyes on. Another set of eyes, not a curiosity, not Hale's wife, not the woman doctor whispered about between flour sacks. Another set of eyes. Naomi read the line twice. Gideon watched her quietly. "You don't have to say yes." "I do if I can help." "That is not the same thing." "No," she said, "but today it is close." She went upstairs for her coat and medicine case. The case no longer came from the locked trunk. It sat on the table now, still closed, still private but reachable. When she returned, Gideon was waiting by the wagon. He had placed the wooden step beside it. She looked at the step, then at him. He said, "Road's muddy." "I see that. You'll need steadier footing with the case." "Yes." Neither mentioned that the last time he had handled that case, he had carried it from a secret hiding place into a stormlit kitchen and learned his marriage was not what he thought. Now he held out his hand to help her up. Naomi took it. This time his grip lingered one breath longer than practical need required, then released. On the road to Cedar Bluff, the medicine case rested openly at Naomi's feet. Gideon drove beside her, silent but not distant. The land moved past them in wet spring color, dark soil, pale grass, creek water flashing between cottonwoods. Naomi looked down at the brass corners of the case. Being known through gossip was one kind of exposure. Being known through work was another. She could not control which one reached town first, but she could decide which one would last. When Cedar Bluff came into view, Gideon slowed the wagon near the mercantile. People turned to look. Naomi felt their eyes, their questions, their old habit of measuring a woman before hearing her speak. Then Dr. Arlen stepped out from the boarding house porch, lifted his hat, and called across the street in a voice clear enough for half the town to hear. "Dr. Hale, thank you for coming." Naomi did not look at Gideon. She could not. She only lifted the medicine case, stepped down into the muddy street, and walked toward the first public doorway in Montana that had opened to her title before closing against it. The boarding house room was too warm. That was the first thing Naomi noticed. Heat pressed against the wallpaper and held the smell of damp wool, old soup, lamp oil, and fear. A stove glowed near the corner, though the day outside had softened into spring rain. On the bed lay a boy of 8 or 9, hair dark with sweat, face turned toward the wall as if even lamplight offended him. His mother stood beside the bed, twisting her apron. Dr. Arlen moved back when Naomi entered. "This is Mrs. Keene's boy, Daniel, fever since yesterday evening, headache, vomiting once, complains of his neck hurting." Naomi set the brass-cornered case on a chair, not the bed. She looked first at the child, then at the room, then at the open window that had been shut tight with a rag stuffed beneath the frame. "Mrs. Keene," she said gently, "I am Dr. Hale. May I examine Daniel?" The woman's eyes flicked over her. Naomi saw the calculation, the surprise, the doubt trying to decide whether it had room to live beside fear. Then Daniel made a small sound. His mother nodded, "Please." Naomi washed her hands in the basin. Dr. Arlen watched closely but did not interfere. Gideon remained outside the room, hat in hand, standing near the hallway door. He had not followed her in as if her work required his presence. He had brought her, then stepped back. "That mattered?" Naomi asked the boy simple questions. His answers were slow but sensible. She felt his forehead, checked his throat, watched his eyes follow her finger, touched the back of his neck with care. He winced but did not cry out. She asked Mrs. Keene about food, water, recent illness in the house, injuries, sleep, rashes, and whether any other children nearby were sick. "No rash," Dr. Arlen said. "Good," Naomi replied, "but we keep watching." The old doctor gave the smallest nod, not offended, listening. Naomi lowered the blanket slightly and checked Daniel's breathing. She did not like the fever. She did not like the closed room. She did not like the boy's dullness, but she would not dress concern as certainty. "I cannot tell you today that this is harmless," she said to Mrs. Keene. "I also cannot tell you it is the worst thing we fear. Right now, he needs cooling, air, quiet, fluids in small amounts and steady watching. If his neck grows more rigid, if he becomes confused, if a rash appears, if he cannot keep water down, you send at once." Mrs. Keene looked frightened. "But what is it?" "I do not know yet," Naomi said. The woman stared at her, as if honesty were a poor substitute for comfort. Naomi softened her voice. "I know that is hard to hear, but guessing to sound certain would not help your son." Dr. Arlen's expression changed. Gideon from the hall lowered his eyes. They moved the bed away from the stove. Naomi opened the window despite Mrs. Keene's worry about night air, explaining that stale heat would not mend fever. Dr. Arlen mixed a careful dose according to what he judged useful, and Naomi agreed after asking the strength. Together, they arranged cool cloths, small sips of water, and a schedule for watching him. No miracle happened. That was important. The boy did not sit up laughing. The fever did not break because Naomi entered the room. Frontier medicine was not a stage show. It was work against uncertainty with poor roads, imperfect tools, tired hands, and human fear waiting at every bedside. By the time they left the room, 3 people stood in the boarding house hallway pretending not to listen. Mrs. Mercer was one of them, a freight clerk, a young woman with a baby against her shoulder. All 3 looked at Naomi differently than they had looked when she entered. Not convinced, perhaps, but attentive. Dr. Arlen took his hat from the peg. "I'll come again tonight." "So will I," Naomi said. He glanced at her. "Road to Hale Creek will be dark by then. I can stay in town if needed." From the hallway, Gideon spoke. "I'll see to the team." Naomi turned. He did not look pleased about the inconvenience. He looked as if the inconvenience had already been accepted because the patient required it. Dr. Arlen looked between them. "There's a small room behind the old assay office. Belongs to Mr. Nolan at the freight depot, empty since winter. If you keep being called into town, you might speak to him." Naomi felt every ear in the hallway sharpen. She kept her face calm. "A room for what purpose?" Dr. Arlen's mouth twitched. "For doctoring, I should think." No one laughed. That made the sentence larger. Naomi did not answer immediately. She had imagined many possible futures on the train west. Most had been defensive. None had included a local physician, cautious and tired but fair-minded, suggesting a room in town while strangers listened. "I would need to see it," she said. "Of course. And I would need to decide what I can offer responsibly. I do not intend to pretend I can do everything." "Good," Dr. Arlen said. "The territory has enough men pretending that already." Mrs. Mercer made a small approving sound, and then seemed surprised at herself. The old assay office stood 2 buildings down from the freight depot, a narrow structure with peeling paint, 2 front windows, and a back room that smelled of dust, old paper, and cold iron. Mr. Nolan, the freight agent, unlocked it with visible curiosity and tried not to stare at Naomi's medicine case. "Not much," he said. "Roof holds, stove works if coaxed, rent would be modest. Folks used it for weighing ore, then storage. Nobody else used the back since January." Naomi walked the room slowly. A table could stand near the window for light, a shelf there for bottles and bandages, a basin by the stove, hooks for clean aprons, a chair for waiting. The floor would need scrubbing. The windows would need washing. The whole place would need more than hope and a title. It could work. The thought frightened her. Gideon stood by the door with his hat in both hands. He did not speak until Mr. Nolan stepped outside to discuss rent with Dr. Arlen. "You're thinking where the table would go," Gideon said. Naomi glanced at him. "I am." "And whether the stove draws." "Yes." "And whether saying yes means you've stepped into something you cannot step out of." She looked at him then. He knew too much, this quiet man. Or perhaps he had simply begun listening to her the way she listened to Patience. "It would change the ranch," she said. "It already has. It would change our marriage." "That already changed too." The answer held no accusation, only truth. Naomi touched the edge of the dusty windowsill. "You do not have to make room for this because guilt tells you to be generous." His face tightened slightly. "Is that what you think I'm doing?" "I do not know. I am trying not to assume." He nodded once, accepting the correction even though it stung. "Fair." Outside, a wagon passed. The wheels shook the thin glass. Gideon stepped farther into the room. "I am not giving you permission, Naomi. You don't need it from me to be what you were before I met you." Her fingers stilled on the sill. "But if you decide this is needed," he continued, "then I need to know how the ranch changes, how often you'll be in town, what you need carried, what hours are dangerous on the road, and what I must not interfere with. Not because I own your work, because I share a life with the woman doing it." Naomi turned fully toward him. There was no romance in the words, not in the usual sense. No flattery, no soft promise, but something steadier stood beneath them. Partnership offered with calluses and caution. "I do not know all those answers yet," she said. "Then say that." "I do not know." "Good." The simplicity of it nearly undid her. By evening, Daniel's fever had not worsened. That alone felt like grace. Naomi and Dr. Arlen checked him together, and this time Mrs. Keene asked questions without apology. Naomi answered what she could and wrote instructions in pencil, leaving space below for changes. As she packed her case, Daniel opened his eyes. "Are you the lady doctor?" he whispered. Naomi looked at him. "I am a doctor, I am also a lady." His cracked lips moved faintly. "Mama said you don't guess." Naomi glanced at Mrs. Keene, whose face flushed. "That is true when I can help it," Naomi said. Daniel considered this as seriously as fever allowed. Good. It was the first endorsement she had received in Cedar Bluff from someone with no interest in politics, gossip, manners, or marriage. Only whether she told the truth. When Naomi stepped out of the boarding house, more townspeople had gathered than necessary. No one cheered. No one made a ceremony. A man moved aside so she could pass with her case. Mrs. Mercer opened the mercantile door and said, "Doctor, if you need clean muslin, I have a bolt set back." "Doctor." Not Mrs. Hale first. "Not a question." Naomi looked at the woman. "I will likely need some." "I'll put it on account." "My account," Naomi said. Mrs. Mercer nodded. "Your account." Across the street, Gideon stood beside the wagon and heard every word. His face was unreadable at first. Then, as Naomi came toward him, he moved the wooden step into place. He did not reach for the medicine case. He did not take it from her hand as if it were too heavy or too public. He only offered his arm for balance. She took it. The street watched them, but for once the watching did not feel only like judgment. It felt like a town making a difficult adjustment because need had forced honesty upon it. On the ride home, Naomi kept the case on her lap. Gideon drove in silence until Cedar Bluff fell behind them. Then he said, "Dr. Hale suits you." The words were quiet. Naomi looked down at the brass corners worn by years of use and weeks of hiding. It is not the whole of me, she said. No, Gideon replied, but it is not separate from you either. She turned her face toward the open land before he could see what the answer did to her. Ahead, Hale Creek Ranch waited under a darkening sky, no longer the place where she had hidden her profession, but the place she would have to decide how to live with it openly. And beside her sat a man still hurt by the lie, still learning the truth, and still driving her home. Yes. The room behind the old assay office stayed in Naomi's mind for 3 days. She saw it while stirring beans. She saw it while changing the dressing on Samuel Vale's leg. She saw it while sorting clean cloth by the front window at Hale Creek Ranch, imagining those same cloths stacked on a narrow shelf where townspeople could reach her without first driving miles through mud to her husband's kitchen. The idea had weight now. Not dream weight. Work weight. That made it harder to ignore. On the 4th morning, Gideon found her standing at the kitchen table with 2 lists written side by side. One read ranch, the other read town room. Beneath each heading she had written supplies, travel, hours, cost, risk, and household changes. He came in quietly enough that she did not notice until Amos lifted his head. "You have been awake a while," Gideon said. Naomi looked up, "Since before dawn." "You should have lit the stove." "I did." He glanced toward the stove, then at the cold coffee beside her elbow. "You did everything except drink." "I was thinking. That usually costs you breakfast." "It does not always. It has twice this week." She almost denied it, then stopped. "No more careful absences." "You are right," she said. Gideon's face changed slightly, as if he had expected resistance and received honesty instead. Naomi pushed the town room list toward him. "I want to lease it." He did not look surprised. "All right." "I am not finished." He pulled out the chair across from her and sat. She folded her hands, then unfolded them. "I want to use the room 2 days each week to begin, more only if the need proves steady and if the ranch can bear the change. I will not ride alone after dark unless there is no reasonable alternative. I will tell you where I am going, what I expect, and when I plan to return. If a patient's condition may keep me in town, I will say so before we leave, not after you discover it by waiting." Gideon listened without interrupting. Naomi continued before fear could turn her careful again. "I also need to write to Dr. Pembroke for supplies and ask Dr. Arlen which medicines can be ordered through his channels. That will require money, some from my own remaining funds, some from patient fees once they exist. I do not want ranch money used without both of us agreeing." His fingers rested on the table near the ledger. "That is a lot of truth before breakfast," he said. Her mouth tightened. "Too much." "No," his voice lowered. "New." That word settled between them. New did not mean easy, but it did not mean impossible. Naomi looked down at the list. "There is one more thing." Gideon waited. "People may come here when I am not in town. Some may arrive at night. Some may be frightened. Some may be foolish. Some may expect you to carry messages, fetch supplies, make decisions, or answer questions that are mine to answer. Yes, I need your help, but I do not want your help to become control." His eyes held hers. The sentence had risk in it. She knew that. A less honest man could take offense and hide it under dignity. A more wounded one could call it ingratitude. Gideon only sat back slowly. "I need to say something hard," he said. Naomi's hands grew still. "All right." I wanted to be angry about the work at first. She had expected many things, not that. He looked toward the window where pale morning touched the yard. "Not because I disliked you doing it, because it gave me a place to put the hurt. The town needing you, Dr. Arlen calling on you, that case open in the house. It was easier to look at all that and think it had invaded my life than to keep looking at the fact that you did not trust me." Naomi said nothing. Gideon turned back. But that would have been dishonest. Your work did not break the trust. The hiding did. Yes, she said quietly. And if I make your work pay forever for what your fear did, I become unfair in a different direction. Her throat tightened. He touched the edge of her list. So here is my truth. I am still hurt, not as sharply as before, but it remains. I may feel it at strange times. I may go quiet when I should speak. I am working against that. But I do not want a smaller version of you in this house because it would be easier for me. Naomi looked at him across the table and felt something inside her give way, not breaking, but loosening after years of being held too tight. I don't know how to be fully known, she said. The confession came bare. Gideon's face softened. Neither do I. She almost laughed, but there was too much ache in it. You told me about Ruth, she said. That was not small. I told you after your truth forced mine open. Still, he looked at the empty chair by the wall. For a moment, Naomi thought the old silence would return and close around him. Instead, he reached for the chair and pulled it away from the wall. The sound of its legs across the floor was simple and enormous. Naomi watched him place it at the table's third side. I kept it there because moving it felt like putting her away, he said. You do not have to move it for me. I am not moving it for you. She understood then and did not speak. Gideon rested his hand on the chair back. Ruth lived here. She mattered here. I can keep that true without making the room answer to death forever. Naomi's eyes burned. He looked embarrassed by the feeling he had revealed, but he did not retreat from it. Will you sit there? He asked. Now, when you choose. She looked at the chair, Ruth's chair, a place held by grief, then offered into life again without erasing what came before. Naomi stood. She moved slowly, giving him time to change his mind, though she knew he would not. Then she sat in the chair. It felt like wood, not judgment. Gideon looked at her there, and grief crossed his face, but beneath it was relief. I think, he said, voice rough, I have been asking this house to stay loyal to sorrow. Naomi laid one hand flat on the table. Sorrow deserves loyalty. It does not deserve command of every room. He breathed out. For a while they sat in the quiet kitchen, 3 chairs around the table, morning opening beyond the window. Then Gideon reached into his shirt pocket and took out a folded paper. I found this yesterday, he said. Naomi's body went cold. He noticed at once. In the desk, he added, not in your things. He slid it toward her. It was one of her early letters, the second she had sent him. The paper was softened at the folds from being read many times. Her own handwriting looked strange now, careful and guarded. I read it again, he said. Naomi did not touch it. In it, you wrote that you had learned to give people truths in portions, because most could not digest the whole of you at once. She closed her eyes. I thought it was a sharp sentence, Gideon said. Now I think it was a warning. I suppose it was. You were telling me more than I understood. And less than I should have. Yes. There was no cruelty in the agreement. Naomi opened her eyes. I still have money from my practice in the East. Gideon went still. I should have told you before now. Not because it affects your ranch directly, but because we are married and because I do not want any more hidden rooms inside our life. How much? She told him. It was not a fortune. It was enough to matter, enough to order supplies, enough to pay rent on the assay room for several months, enough that withholding it would have repeated the same pattern in a new shape. Gideon absorbed the number. You were keeping it separate in case you needed to leave. Yes. The word fell hard. His face tightened. Naomi did not soften it. That was true when I arrived. I did not know you. I needed a way to remain free if the marriage became unsafe or impossible. I do not apologize for protecting myself then. His eyes held hers. But I should have told you once this became a shared life, rather than an arrangement I might need to escape, she said. I am telling you now because I will not let you learn it by accident. Gideon looked away toward the stove. The silence hurt. Naomi let it. At last, he said, I hate that you needed such a plan. I needed it before you had done anything to deserve trust. I know. And I hate that I kept living by it after you had. He looked back then. That was the moment. Not forgiveness announced like a sermon. Not romance smoothing the hard edges. Only a man seeing that she had chosen discomfort before discovery, truth before emergency, and his right to know before her wish to be safely perceived. I trust this, he said. Naomi's breath caught. What? You telling me something that might hurt your case. She looked at him. His voice stayed low. That is what I needed, not perfection, not never being afraid, this. The kitchen seemed to warm around her, though the stove had burned low. Naomi reached across the table. She stopped halfway. He looked at her hand, then placed his own over it. Work-rough palm, steady pressure. No claim, no rescue, a choice. I want this marriage to become real, she said. It is real. Legally. In work. Yes. He leaned slightly closer. What else do you want it to be? She met his eyes, frightened by the plainness required. Chosen, she said. Not endured, not managed. Chosen with the whole truth present. His thumb moved once across her knuckles. Then we choose slow, he said. Naomi let out a breath that nearly became a laugh, and nearly became tears. Slow is not usually my difficulty, she said. Number honest is. She stared at him. Then he smiled. It was small, tired, and risky. Naomi laughed, softly this time, and the sound did not startle either of them. Later that day, they rode into Cedar Bluff together. Naomi carried her medicine case openly, and Gideon carried a tin of nails, a broom, and the practical look of a man who had accepted that any new beginning required sweeping first. At the assay office, Mr. Nolan handed Naomi the key to the back room. Not Gideon. Naomi. She paid the first month's rent from her own purse and wrote her name on the receipt herself. Dr. Naomi Hale. Her hand paused over the double name. Gideon saw it. You can sign however you choose, he said. I know. She looked at the page, then signed again below the receipt for Mr. Nolan's record. Dr. Naomi Wren. Gideon read it, and something like pride moved quietly through his face. Not possession. Recognition. That evening they scrubbed the room together. Naomi washed the windows until light entered cleanly. Gideon repaired the loose shelf. He did not arrange her instruments. He did not decide where the table should go. When she asked him to lift it beneath the front window, he did. As the sun lowered, Dr. Arlen stopped by and looked through the open door. Looks like a practice, he said. Naomi stood with her sleeves rolled, hair loosened at the temples, apron damp from wash water, medicine case closed on the newly scrubbed table. Not yet, she said. Gideon leaned the broom against the wall. What does it need? Naomi looked around the bare room at the clean basin, the shelf, the chair, the window facing Cedar Bluff's muddy street. Then she looked at the man, waiting to hear the answer, without giving it for her. Patience, she said, and a sign. Gideon nodded once, then we'll start with the sign. Naomi did not correct the we. This time it fit. Yes. The sign took Gideon 3 evenings. Not because the letters were complicated, but because he scraped the first board clean after Naomi looked at it for too long without speaking. What is wrong with it? He asked. They stood in the barn doorway with sunset lying red across the yard. The board rested on 2 sawhorses between them. Gideon had painted the words neatly enough. Dr. Naomi Hale. Naomi wiped her hands on her apron. Nothing is wrong. That is not the same as saying it is right. She looked at him. He had learned her too well to be easily managed now. The name is not false, she said. No, but it feels unfinished. Gideon nodded once, picked up the board, and carried it back inside the barn. The next evening, he painted another. Dr. Naomi Wren. Naomi stood before it with the lantern in her hand. The old name, the earned name, the name that had crossed lecture halls, sick rooms, train stations, and fear. It looked right. It also looked lonely. Gideon waited. She touched the edge of the board. I do not want to disappear into marriage. I know. I do not want to pretend marriage did not change my life either. I know that too. On the third evening, they made the sign together. Dr. Naomi Wren Hale. Physician. The letters were plain black on a cream board, easy to read from the muddy street. No flourish, no apology. When they hung it beside the door of the old assay room, Mr. Nolan came out from the freight office, tipped his hat and said, "Looks settled." Naomi looked at the sign. Yes, she said, it does. Settled did not mean finished. The first weeks of the practice were hard in ordinary ways. The stove smoked when the wind came from the east. The shelf Gideon repaired held firm, but the floor near the basin dipped, so water collected unless wiped quickly. Patients arrived at inconvenient hours with complaints both real and imagined. Some paid with coins. Some paid with eggs, mending, coffee, or promises written carefully in Naomi's account book. She learned to keep 2 ledgers now. One for the practice, one for the ranch. The practice ledger began with modest entries. Mrs. Keene paid 20 cents after Daniel's fever broke without worsening. Samuel Vale sent a note in uneven handwriting, and a side of bacon Naomi immediately gave to Thomas because she did not trust herself to look grateful over cured meat. Mrs. Mercer brought clean muslin and insisted on marking it properly to Dr. Wren Hale's account. A miner's wife came in one cold morning and said, without sitting, "Will you listen before deciding I'm foolish?" Naomi put down her pencil. Yes. The woman sat. That was how recognition grew. Not as applause. As return. People came back because instructions helped. Because Naomi told them what she knew and what she did not. Because she washed the basin between patients. Because she wrote notes in pencil for mothers too frightened to remember every word. Because she did not laugh at pain. Because she did not make certainty where none existed. Some still whispered. Some never came. One man asked whether a lady doctor charged less. Naomi looked at him over her spectacles and said, "Only when the patient improves less." He paid the regular fee. Gideon heard that story from Mrs. Mercer and laughed alone beside the freight office before trying to hide it when Naomi stepped outside. "You enjoyed that," she said. "I did. You should be ashamed. I will attempt it later." Their marriage changed more slowly than the town. Trust did not return like a door swinging open. It returned like fence repair after winter, post by post, wire by wire. Naomi told Gideon when she expected a late patient. Gideon told her when Ruth's birthday came and asked to ride alone that morning. Naomi did not mistake solitude for rejection. Gideon did not mistake her long hours for avoidance. Some evenings she returned to Hale Creek exhausted, her medicine case beside her feet in the wagon, and found supper kept warm without comment. Some mornings Gideon rode with her into town and waited outside the practice until she finished, not impatient, not proud in a public way, only present. One night in early summer, a ranch hand from the North Range brought his wife to the practice after dark. The woman had fever and a cough Naomi did not like. Naomi stayed late, cooling the room, listening, questioning, writing instructions, and finally sending the man to fetch Dr. Arlen, because the case needed 2 physicians and more supplies than she kept. Gideon waited in the front room with his coat on the peg and 2 cups of coffee cooling near the stove. When Naomi came out, tired enough that her shoulders had dropped, she found him standing. "I need Dr. Arlen," she said. "I'll go." "No," she caught his sleeve. "The husband has gone. I need you to stay with me until he returns." The words were simple. They were also a trust she had not known how to offer months before. Gideon heard it. He took off his hat and set it on the table. "Then I stay." They sat through the deep hours with the lamp burning low and the patient breathing behind the closed door. There was nothing romantic in the waiting. There was fear, work, coffee gone bitter, and the old discipline of not letting exhaustion make decisions. Yet Naomi felt, in that plain room with Gideon beside her, that some part of their marriage had become more intimate than touch. She had asked. He had stayed. Weeks passed. Spring turned into full summer. Hale Creek brightened at the banks. The cattle grew sleek. The North Pasture debt did not vanish, but the ranch accounts held steadier under Naomi's sharper columns and Gideon's better timing. Ruth's chair remained at the kitchen table. Sometimes Naomi sat there. Sometimes Gideon did. Sometimes it stayed empty, not as a shrine, but as part of the house's honest history. One Sunday afternoon, Gideon drove Naomi to the small rise above the creek where Ruth was buried. Naomi had not asked to go. He had not offered before. The grave was simple, marked with a stone Gideon had set himself. Grass moved around it in the wind. Naomi stood a few steps back while Gideon removed his hat. "She would have liked you," he said after a while. Naomi did not answer quickly. "Are you sure?" "No, but I think she would have respected you. That mattered more to her." Naomi looked toward the creek. "I am not here to take her place." "I know. I need you to know that I know." He turned then, and the grief in his face was no longer a locked room. It was part of the weather of him, something that would come and go and be survived without being denied. "You are not my second chance at Ruth," he said. "You are my first chance at Naomi." The wind moved through the grass. Naomi reached for his hand. This time, there was no hesitation from either of them. By late summer, the practice had become a fact Cedar Bluff no longer needed to discuss every day. The sign weathered slightly at the edges. The room smelled of soap, dried herbs, paper, and stove smoke. The brass-cornered medicine case sat openly on the table beneath the window, its surface scratched now from useful work. Nothing covered it. Nothing hid it. Patients saw it when they entered, and most stopped noticing after the first minute because Naomi herself mattered more. That was the victory. Not that every person approved. Not that every wound in her had closed. Not that Gideon looked at her and erased every unkind room she had ever stood in. The victory was that she no longer arranged herself into acceptable pieces before entering her own life. One evening, after a long day of patience, Naomi stood in the practice doorway and watched the sun lower over Cedar Bluff's dusty street. Mrs. Mercer locked the mercantile. Mr. Nolan carried freight papers under one arm. A child waved at her from the boarding house porch and called, "Good night, Dr. Wren Hale." Naomi lifted her hand. Behind her, Gideon's coat hung from the peg near the stove. He had come to collect her after checking the town blacksmith's mare, then fallen asleep for 20 minutes in the chair by the wall with his hat over one knee. 2 cups waited on the small table, one with coffee, one with tea. She looked at the medicine case in the open lamplight. Once she had buried it under shawls because she believed being fully known would cost her the first gentle place she had found. Now it stood beside her ledgers, her clean cloths, her appointment notes, and her husband's coat. Gideon woke as she closed the ledger. "Late?" he asked, voice rough with sleep. "Late enough. Ready for home." Naomi looked around the room that was hers, then toward the man waiting without hurry. "Yes," she said, "both of them." He understood. He stood, took his coat from the peg, and held the door while she lifted the medicine case herself. Outside, ranch dust lay on the threshold where his boots had carried Hale Creek into her practice, and lamplight followed them into the street. She had not stopped being a doctor to become a wife. She had not stopped being a wife to remain herself. And at last, Naomi Wren Hale walked home whole.